This is Algebra 2, Unit 5, Lesson 3. In this lesson, we're going to talk more about fraction exponents. Hopefully in Lesson 2, you got a good foundation for it, and now we're going to go a little bit further. If you look at this expression, we've got 1 over 3x minus 2 to the negative 1/2. And in the last lesson, we learned that if you have a power that is a fraction, that is, or that can be converted to a radical exponent. Now, if that is a negative on the bottom, that means it will be a positive if we move it to the top. So basically what we have here is the same thing as 3x minus 2 to the positive 1/2, which is the same thing as the square root of 3x minus 2. That's really all I can do with that one. I can't separate that out. I can't take anything out of it. That is all I would be able to do. With this one, that is another expression, another binomial to a power. I'm allowed to write that as the cube root of 4x squared plus 6 squared. And I could write that square on the outside of the radical, or I could make this, put it in parentheses, and put the square on the inside. They mean exactly the same thing. Neither one is any better than the other. You just need to understand that I could have that 2 on the inside or the outside, and they are exactly the same thing. So if you have a multiple choice problem and it has the exponent on the outside, but you had it written on the inside, you can choose that as your choice. That is fine. It would work. For this one, we have 3x to the 1/5. Now, in this one, notice up here, the whole thing was in parentheses, so the whole thing was to the 2/3 power. In this one, the 3 is not attached to that 1/5, so the only thing to the 1/5 power is the x. Sort of like if we have 3x squared, that 3 does not have to be squared. It stands alone. So here, that is the same thing as 3 times the 5th root of x. And you need to understand the difference between when we have parentheses and when we don't. With this one, if that were in parentheses and the whole thing was squared, then that would mean 9x squared. Here I've got just a few more examples for you. With this one, if I were to rewrite that as a radical, I would say that that's the square root of 4 to the 5th. Now, the square root of 4 is 2, so that is the same thing as 2 to the 5th, or 32. And we will want to simplify that as simple as we can, or get it down, simplify it to a whole number if we can do that. For this one, that would be 3 times the square root of x cubed, and then we can simplify that radical, and that would be 3. We can bring out an x, and we have a square root with an x left inside. For this one, that's the same thing as the square root of 5. We're just converting there. This one, that's the same thing as the cube root of 81, which in that 81 can be broken down into 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. So that means we can bring out a 3, and we're left with a 3 on the inside. For this one, that's the 4th root of 81, and again, 81 is 3 times 3 times 3 times 3. If anything shows up 4 times, we can bring it out once, so that would be 3. In this one, that is the same thing as the 4th root of 81x to the 5th. Since the whole thing is in parentheses, the whole thing has to go underneath the 4th root. And with that, the 4th root of 81 is 3. 4 goes into 5 once, so we can bring 1x out, and we will have 1x left inside. For this one, that one is to a negative exponent, but notice some of these are negative as well. So when you have something in parentheses to a power, remember we are allowed to take that power and multiply it by all the powers on the inside. So this 4 is understood to be to a first power. So if I multiply that, I'm going to have that as 4 to the negative 5/2 x, negative 4 times negative 5/2. Well, that is going to be a positive 20 over 2, or a positive 10. And then y, and we've got negative 8 times negative 5/2. Negative 8 times negative 5 halves, that would be a positive 40 over 2, so that would be y to the 20th power. And then since that 4 is to a negative power, we do need to write that on the bottom, so that would be 4 to the 5 halves on bottom, and then the x to the 10th, y to the 20th would be on the top. And then you need to pay attention to that 4 to the 5 halves. Let's think about what that is. 4 to the 5 halves. Well, isn't that the same thing as the square root of 4 to the 5th, which would be 2 to the 5th, or 32? So here on the bottom, the top was x to the 10th, y to the 20th. The bottom is 32, to simplify that completely.